Good morning. Thank you for continuing with us today at CRA-TV from Black Hat. I am Mandy. I am joined by Andrew Harding.
Hi.
He is the VP of Security Strategy at Menlo Security. Now, Andrew, I'm actually very interested to discuss this because your company's posture is that any browser can become a secure enterprise browser. Now, before we jump into the particulars on that, I would like to understand a little bit more how, from your past, as having focused on and even invented things for endpoint security, how do you feel like that your view on endpoint security has modified because of browser-based attacks? Or what has it been in your present experience, thinking back to endpoint security not being sufficient?
You know, in an earlier era, SSL VPNs were used to try to make it easier and more secure to provide remote access. And they were the right thing for the time, now maybe almost 20 years ago. And we had to combine endpoint posture checks and intelligence about the endpoint with the policy that was used to provide then remote access. And that slowly merged into access control and what's today become zero trust access. The work on endpoint security was really to gather telemetry about the endpoint and then use it in network policy. That was quite innovative back in 2004, 2005. And it's also representative of where I've spent a lot of time, is really right at the edge between systems and the network, because this is, I think, where security policy has often fallen down. And that's evident today in the issues we're having with browsers being the new point of weakness. Not because network security teams have done anything wrong, not because endpoint security doesn't get the job done, but because threat actors have moved towards the browser as we've secured other services.
Well, absolutely. And isn't it that with browser-based attacks, it's a very lucrative focus, because today versus 2004, 2005, you have employees spending 75 to 80% of their time actually on browsers actively. With the changing landscape of how employees are using browsers, what kind of security threats do you see increasing?
So we see threats not going after the edge of an enterprise network by going after a vulnerability in a system on the edge. That still happens. If you have a vulnerable system exposed to the internet, that is still a problem. But the industry's actually done a pretty good job getting after those exposure points, getting after things like Log4Shell or Citrix Bleed. A lot of folks have just tried to harden that edge. Other folks pull that edge in with a cloud-driven approach like Menlo, so they don't even have to be exposed to the outside world. But as that surface has been hardened, threat actors have moved to a place that's softer, to use a word. And that softer place is where people are doing their job. We know today from our own analysis and from some other reports that 50% of enterprise workers do their entire job inside of the browser. And about 80% of enterprise workers do 80% of the job inside the browser. So it's really time to put controls around the browser to treat it like an asset, because it's no different than a PC or a laptop. It's no different than a mobile device that needs to be managed. It's a workspace that moves with the user across those devices. And so we have to get security policy applied there. We need to manage that system, the browser as a system.
Okay.
We need to manage to protect the user who's working within that browser, protect them from internet-borne threats. And in doing that, we can't just be another defensive widget. We need to make sure that we're providing sort of what I call the positive use cases. Make zero trust access really easy to deploy. It's been terribly hard to get beyond data center zero trust or kind of on-campus zero trust or trust that requires a client to be rolled out to every machine. It's been really hard to make Gen AI work in a way that controls data. Hybrid work, remote access has been tough. We moved into a different era with COVID. We deployed a lot of things to make COVID work, and we've been living with SSL VPNs that have been used for too long, VDI systems, remote desktop systems that have been used way too much, not for what they were intended to be used. There's a different approach that can provide secure application access so that we're unlocking those positive use cases while protecting users and managing the browser like the asset that it is.
Now, to me, that's gorgeous. It's a fantastic idea and way to increase the functionality of the security at the end user space. But why is it not the best option to just adopt a dedicated enterprise browser then?
I think we have already adopted a dedicated enterprise browser. Some of us, I hear this a lot from customers. Some of us have two enterprise browsers. I work mostly on Mac OS. I work with Chrome every day, and I've got Safari out there on the side, and I don't really know why. Usually it's kind of research stuff that I use Safari for, but I kind of have the two browsers up. I don't want to be forced to use some new browser and learn. More importantly, that's a very expensive proposition for a company to go chase. They have to deploy new software. They take the risk of a complicated endpoint agent being deployed to every machine. We saw what happens when agents go wrong just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And I don't think we need more complexity in the endpoint. We also want to give users the choice to work as they will to get work done while managing risk. And we don't need to do the job that Chrome and Microsoft and Apple are doing pretty well. Our partners at Google build a great browser. Edge and Chrome together account for about 95% of enterprise use of browsers. And we've seen Safari increasing, much as I use both. And today we actually announced enhancements to our Zero Trust Access to increase support for the Mac OS, the Apple ecosystem, both on mobile devices and on Mac OS. So I think making browsers work and defending them while enabling users is just a more economically acceptable option, and it keeps end users happy because they don't have to do something new. They can do what they do.
That I was thinking about just the announcement that that Menlo was able to make today, and really coming from the research and information that your team has comprised, especially like referring to the Global Cyber Gangs report. Can you give some detail on particularities that were reported in that report, and have they impacted what you released today?
It's a great question. The Global Cyber Gangs report is really focused on our protection mechanisms, our AI-driven protection from heat, highly evasive and adaptive threats. The Cyber Gangs report reports on such threats. It really amounts to the cyber gangs, sometimes nation-state driven activity. They're using the same kind of software tools that we use to build our product. So they're using the tools that software engineering folks use. They're operating at a speed that hasn't really been seen in the past because they've adopted the same engineering practices as professional developers. And they've also been clever about the tactics they use. They used to get blocked by a URL filter, and that was enough. And so they moved, and then they moved. And we've seen just this last week in new research, they're actually hiding inside of trusted applications. We call this living off trusted sites, LOTS. The research that was announced today as a follow-up to that report, we see them hiding inside of Google Draw, using a meta web property to hide the path to a phishing URL, and then they present a fraudulent version of an Amazon login and try to phish credentials. Heat Shield, a product, finds this and stops it. And our threat team recognized this new tactic, this kind of chained redirection using Open Redirect inside of popular applications that enables a phishing threat to get through. And traditional controls just don't catch that. Menlo's customers are protected from that.
That's brilliant. So this makes me think of something I saw you speak on recently, and it was a heat attack that the attack actually deployed through JavaScript. So there was no way it would have been known or seen through any endpoint security protection. Can you give a summary of that?
The fileless attack composes the payload like sort of with chunks. So JavaScript will compose the payload on the endpoint in chunks, and then those chunks are sort of put together and the attack is executed on the endpoint. And because no file is created, the actions by the payload will happen, and EDR or EPP won't even see it. Now, I'm not arguing against EPP and EDR. They need to be there. But threats get through. Threats get through cloud services that are trying to provide kind of edge protection, and threats get through existing endpoint protections. So we need to work together, and Menlo makes sure that none of that content gets to an endpoint because it operates inside of the secure cloud browser, which is a hardened digital twin of the local browser.
Okay.
It works in concert with a local browser that has a managed policy. It protects the user from exactly the threats you just described. And then along the way, and really as an outcome of this architecture, we provide secure application access, zero trust access, that's just easy to deploy. You can use it with an extension, you can use it with the browsers you want and log in through a portal. It's just easy to get to a zero trust model, which really contrasts with the history of endpoint security checks, network admission control, kind of traditional zero trust network architectures. These things have been complex to deploy, expensive to operate. Menlo changes that game. With our announcement today and the enhancements to zero trust, we bring that to the Mac ecosystem. We also bring it to other cloud environments. In our partnership with Google, we've deployed a multi-cloud support for Google Cloud. We also support Microsoft Azure. So for pretty much every arena, we can provide zero trust access that's just easy to own.
So, in let's say a large organization, when they are adopting Menlo's security solutions, can you give an estimate on the time that it takes for the adoption to actually fully roll out?
That's a really good question. We have a great example. It's a customer example. It's up on our website, kind of under customer stories, where a company that had been struggling to deploy zero trust deployed to hundreds of users in an afternoon. And then over the course of weeks, that was their pilot, over the course of weeks rolled out to, I think it's 40 or 60,000 users.
Really?
There's a customer story up on the website about it. So it's very different than those stories you hear about millions of dollars. It's a pilot of 200 users deploying the client. The cloud service is hard. Routing has to be changed. All of that complexity just goes away if you move browsing to the cloud, if you rely on security services in the cloud to do zero trust access. And yeah, along the way, inside of the cloud, we have a secure web gateway, we have SaaS governance, so we can make sure that those traditional features, the table stake features that you need, they're there. But critically, by moving browsing to the cloud, and by using a secure cloud browser that works with the local browser from one of the major browser sort of producers, you can get the defenses you need while getting work done in a way that's easy and cost effective.
I'm actually very excited. I feel like that's an incredibly calming way for the security team to go, wow, we get to do all of this without having to retrain our end users, without having to retrain anybody, without having to go person to person. Am I correct on that?
You're on the money. It's
Okay.
great for end users because it just works the way they expect it to. You don't even notice that you're using the cloud browser because it's just the tabs that you expect right there.
Right.
And there's a bunch of stuff happening under the covers. There are some times when you get a message from us about an alert or an event, but it's like calming is a good way to describe it because users don't have to change, and we automate things for the security operations team. We can provide a forensic archive of any activity that needed to be looked at. So if there's a DLP alert or maybe a threat alert or maybe a phishing alert, like, hey, we think maybe that user did enter a credential somewhere, we can provide really like a streamed video view of what they did, a forensic archive. We don't store that in our cloud. It goes to the customer's cloud.
Okay.
That way the SOC team can just point, click play, and see what happened.
That's fascinating given that the amount of time and consistent resources that have to be allocated currently for enterprises using regular old Chrome, using our standard accepted browsers out there. Am I correct in thinking that the amount of time it has taken for constant updates, changes, rechecks, settings, doing all of that was literally sometimes just impossible due to time constraints for the security team?
It's this is something that's not so common. There are thousands of settings just in Chrome. Use Chrome as an example, and there are also dozens and dozens of new features that roll in. It's a very robust project, and then Google's building on top of it. And even with all the security measures around Chromium and Chrome, issues happen. So there are thousands of elements to worry about. Our browser posture manager automates that, automates achieving compliance with well-known trusted benchmarks for security, and then deploying that into the local browser so that the security team doesn't have to think about thousands of things.
Right.
They think about, in this area, they think about compliance with one thing.
That makes me very happy for the security teams. So, Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today. And for all of our fantastic audience members, to find out more about Menlo Security, please visit securityweekly.com/MenloBH. That's MENLOBH. And head on over to securityweekly.com/Black to find all of the Black Hat coverage by Cyber Risk Alliance. Thank you.
Thanks so much.